Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Overcoming the Podcast. I am your host, Taylor, founder and face of Survivors Overcoming Silence, a complex trauma survivor myself, and also an occupational therapist and the doctor of occupational therapy, which is where you get SOS with Dr. Taylor if you follow me on social media. So, hey, it has been a hot minute. A lot more than a hot minute. It's actually been over a year. I just checked before I started recording, and it has been since September 2023 that I have popped on and published an episode for you all. And it is now October of 2024 as I am recording this. So I have missed you all so much. If you know anything about me, you know that podcasting is my absolute favorite pastime. I have the gift of gab and self-reflection and all of those things. And I have consistently been known to bring you along my journey and healing out loud. And in this last season, I needed to bring people in less along the way while I still want to share. And I have a lot of deep reflections to give and to share about the nuances and dualities of healing and what it really can mean from healing from complex trauma. Like I thought I was all good, and then pooh, this year happened. And just really what all of those things mean, and then kind of bringing it together and diving into some of these different topics that we haven't really talked about a lot. And that's partly because, yes, I didn't have as much personal experience, but also was really uncomfortable with some of these things, which you will definitely hear more about. So I'll give you a little synopsis of this past year. And some of you may know pieces of this in as if you've been following me on social media, but definitely wanted to share a little bit for anyone who's catching up. And yes, if you are watching, by the way, before I dive into this, because I'm procrastinating because this is super vulnerable. I'm in a new house. I'm in a new space. I have different people around me. We've rebranded with colors and all those things. And we went from Survivors Overcoming Silence to Living Loud. So overcoming silence, all of the things that you were, not even just your story, but everything about you that was just like in that survival mode, frozen, stuck, that fawn mode, people pleasing, everything that silenced who you were, to now living loudly, okay? We're sitting there, we are owning what happened to us. We're saying this is not okay. We are sharing our healing journey because we nearly died in the silence. We are sharing our authentic selves and coming back to this and saying, you know what? I don't care what you think about me. This is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. And this podcast is here to not only bring you along with my journey and bring other people in and talk about all of these different topics, but it's really here to give space for all parts of you. And my hope is by me sharing more of my story, it allows you to like self-reflect on your own. And you also get to take in some of the tools and the lessons along the way. But okay, this last year. Whoo. I put my hand down on my table and my camera started shaking, and I feel like that is really representative of this last year. Like a Rocky Tower moment, boom. Okay, so let's go back to June of 2023. I was in Pilates and I got injured while I was in class. I was just not fully paying attention, and I was doing like a shoulder extension where my arm was slightly like pulled back like a V away from my body, and then I was just pulling straight back, which like works together like the back of your shoulder muscles, the back muscles, like it gets you pretty strong and feeling good, right? So at this point, I had been going to Pilates for a while, and I was up to like 5 times a week. I was feeling good. I just hit like a huge milestone. It was like 250 classes, and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, you look so good. You're feeling so good." And this was like days after I put up a post saying this is my milestone, and this has been really hard because physical health has been a hard thing for me. And anyways, so I'm sitting in class and I don't remember if there was something going on or I just wasn't paying attention, but my body awareness is always like on point, okay? And something happened to where I realized I was in my shoulder joint was rotated too far the other way. I pulled it back with some really heavy weight and I heard a pop in the middle of the exercise. And luckily it was one of the last ones. And I was like, okay. And it kind of felt a little sore, but it wasn't like excruciating, okay? So I get home. By the time I get home, I noticed my shoulders kind of really fell, like completely, like there's no muscle activation and it was just starting to throb in pain. Throughout that day and into the night, I started realizing that I couldn't hold my shoulder against gravity and that was having like some nerve pain in my hand. Like I was just really not okay. So long story short there, I ended up having an issue with my shoulder and led me to PT. and I basically wasn't allowed to work out for a while. And looking at it originally, they said, well, this is like, class 2 injury. This should maybe be like, 6 months recovery, and then you should be back to pretty much normal. I was like, great. Well, 6 months goes by, 9 months goes by, a year goes by. We're still kind of behind where I should be in recovery. And at the time of this, I went to just see whatever doctor. And they basically told me that I should be referred to a joint specialist. So I got referred to a rheumatologist, and they did all of these things for me. And they basically told me that, hey, by the way, we can't see you for this. We think you might have something called Ehlers-Danlos, which is hypermobility. And based on these other things that you're talking about, this would make a lot of sense. And also has to do with slow wound healing, but I'm not the one who can diagnose it. But I can diagnose you with rheumatoid arthritis, which, by the way, you have. What? What? So that happened, and that started my chronic illness journey. And I will definitely be talking about that in other episodes in detail. But essentially what happened there is I just went through, I found all the broken systems. I was fighting against everything. I was getting denied for everything. I was being gaslit by professionals. No one had any idea what was going on in my body. My entire body was shutting down. Spoiler alert, they do not think I actually have rheumatoid arthritis. I have mast cell activation syndrome, which is an overactivation of the mast cells in your body, which are responsible for the histamine responses. And the histamine response is like histamine allergy. Think of antihistamine. It's like all of those big responses in your body, inflammation, rash, everything. I lost my voice multiple times because of this. And specialists that I have seen have basically said that at the time when anything is flaring, I could have been diagnosed with anything because the antibodies in my body were all elevated, and therefore it was showing for rheumatoid arthritis. So basically, I went through the last year of my body shutting down, and it was really hard. There were times, a lot of times, where I couldn't get out of bed. If physically wasn't an issue, then emotionally was an issue. If emotionally was an issue, then relationally was an issue. If relationally wasn't an issue, then my self-esteem and my sense of self was an issue. So I kind of started off with this physical health journey, which also led me to really have to stop and be very still. And that included being connected with my thoughts in things that I was avoiding that I didn't even realize that I was. And that brings me to the episode that I recorded most recently, which is talking about toxic relationships. And we talked a little bit about the delulu of relationships, the fantasy brain, all of that. And in the time where I was forced to sit still, pretty much every single trauma wound that I had left came to the surface, including repressed memories, which I will go into. I'm not going to talk about that on this episode, but it is... my ACE score for adverse childhood experiences has gone up. I was a 6, now I'm a 7. And it was a very extremely hard thing for me. But there has been a semi-happy ending. And I think when I sat still, also at the same time, the past came back to me. Talk about a test from the universe. When your body is shutting down, your worst self, I was gaining weight and then I was losing weight. I was losing muscle, and then for a while I looked really good and people were commenting how I looked really good, but my body was physically just losing everything. I couldn't there's moments where I was just bedridden, and I couldn't my blood pressure was up and down. My vitals that have always been really stable. I have had picture perfect blood pressure, okay, dipped. There's just so many things that I took for granted in my health that I really faced this time, and it's impacted every ounce of self and life and everything. And like I said, when I was meant to sit still, the universe brought back what me and my therapist are calling the tour of Tay's past, which is essentially people from the past and relationships that were revisited, because I kind of started off with, at the time that I left off with you guys, I had basically been through a season of pruning where I took everything out of my life that did not serve me. I was no contact with my entire family. I did not really have any relationships in person. My roommate was someone who I considered a friend as well, but she also was a very busy human and had other things going on. And I rarely saw her and was essentially living alone. It was just me and my dog every day during this period. And I also at the time was working as a nanny to try and make SOS work. And I also like couldn't get back into my profession by trade of occupational therapy, where I would have to be doing a lot more physical heavy lifting with kids. And so I really was just stuck in limited, financially limited, disconnected from relationships, everything. So started off with my mother coming back. And a lot of you found me during the video that went viral where I was talking about, is there a ideal good parent in an abusive household where a child was knowingly abused? Like, is there really good? When we talk about dysfunctional family dynamics, the enabling people are part of that, right? And so I got to the realization where I was that even if that was the case, that yes, there is accountability in where I was left in an abusive household and it was known about. There also was this challenge in perspective with not understanding fully the compassion and all of the nuances when it comes to generational trauma. But also, my main thing was looking at how my mother was continuing to treat me. And the louder that I got about my story and my healing and my own quirks and loving myself and all of that, the more defensive she seemed to get. And I don't even think she noticed, but there were some really harmful comments that were shared. There was just deep invalidation of who I even was, of my past, of everything. And looking back, I definitely see it's because the way I was speaking up, it was impacting her too. And this is a phenomenon that I've talked about a lot, is that when survivors are speaking up and we are overcoming that silence and we are wanting to be heard and we are bringing attention and asking for accountability and all of these things, we act as a mirror. And people who are bringing to the attention, they can either look in the reflection and say, wow, this is what I see. This is the true reflection. I see this, sorry. Or they could look at that mirror and say, that mirror is defective. That's not what actually is there. And those who are triggered and in denial and not ready to kind of go there yet get more of that defensive response. And so that's what I got, was extremely defensive responses, to the point where like my mouth dropped at some of the things that she said. And I had to go back to other people who were there like, did I make that up? Like, there is no way that this lives in my body and this is what it is. And people were like, absolutely not. Like, this was very real. I was there as an adult and I saw this. And then I had other people come back from my past. My close childhood friend from when I was like 5 years old, who ended up being my next door neighbor for years. She kind of came back into my life after we had a disjointed relationship and not fully like reconnected. And it would be nice, but I really don't know if we'll ever fully align that way. But she helped me fill in some blanks from my past. And then I had some exes come back around that I had to figure out how I wanted them in my life or not, or the lessons, and let those go gracefully. And I had some friends come in and some others stick around, actually, which I'm pretty sure I'll do another episode on. And I reconnected with one of my very good friends who I consider like my person. I recorded an episode on like rupture and repair in relationships, and I was referring to that one that I wish I would have reconnected with. And she found me because SOS kept popping up on her explore page on social media. And then one day she friended me, and I went back and I looked, and on Facebook, on my personal account, I had a message. And I was like, oh my gosh. And we went to lunch, which turned into dinner, ended up being 4 hours long. It's like we picked up where we left off. And it was just a really beautiful thing. So I'm really grateful to have her back in my life. And it's been really uncomfortable kind of facing some of my past, because there are people who were around back when I cut things off and back when things were messy and I was triggered and all of those things. And, like we both realized that the role that we played, and it was definitely more of a trauma bonding, and we didn't understand boundaries, and there's all kinds of things going on. And it's just back in like a safer, healthier, more integrated relationship, which seems to be the theme. And I definitely believe that the people who are meant to be in your life will come back around at whatever point. There's nothing we need to do. There is nothing that, the more we push or force or anything like that, it actually pushes people away. And I think by the emotional healing that I had been doing, I just kind of was putting out the vibes to the universe. Like I want my people back. Like I want the people who are meant to be there, and whether that is new people or old people or whatever it is. And so I had that really good friend who's back in, and we're best friends and close as ever. And like I said, that's a really beautiful thing and really special to me. And yeah, so that's been really healing. And then also I reconnected with my mother again. And the last that everyone saw on social media, I was crying because over a video that says you can't force someone to heal and you can't force them to do the work or see your perspective and you can't change someone. And when my mom came back in originally, I said, here are my terms. When I went no contact, I said, I need you to listen to me and I need you to actually hear me out in a conversation about my trauma and how it has impacted me, and read this chapter on how the smallest things that you think aren't going to impact someone developmentally. And she said, your process is different than my process. I love you, but that's not something that I can do. And I was like, okay, well, I'm closing the door then. Like, it's done. Like, I'm not whatever. And what you saw on social media was that grieving process. And then she came back around. I talked a little bit about how I was in financial stress, and I ended up getting sick, which the kids were negative for COVID, but it really impacted me really deeply. And I swear it was COVID. But anyways, to the point where I was a nanny and I was just barely making it through. And I reached out to my mom and she offered to help me financially. And I always hesitate with financial anything because there are so many strings, and my primary abuser and the other parent is absolutely a narcissist and used gifts or anything like that as like a string that they can pull back and use against you at any time, whether it's I helped you here, I did this favor, you owe me here, or how dare you, or whatever it is. The presents to try and lure you to talk to them or whatever it is. It's a way of love bombing and hoovering, but with physical things. And so I was very much worried about taking any financial assistance from her, and originally turned her down. And then it got to like a day or two where I was like, I'm not gonna be able to pay my rent. And so I was like crying and I was like, okay, I'll do it. Like I will pay you back, all of this stuff. And that got me out of a really big jam. And she was very gracious. She was very kind. She was open, which is like not where we left things. Like I said, it was very hostile and defensive. So I was just like, okay. And I could tell that she was coming from a place where she wanted to reconnect, she wanted to understand, and she wanted to learn, but it was a little bit harder for her to see my context. And even I noticed when we were talking and over text, and I was just trying to get her to see my side, and there was a way that we disagreed on something. And I was just sharing why I disagreed and explaining the concept. And she was like, I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight. And there was nothing in my tone, there was nothing that I was saying that was fighting or picking a fight. And I had this epiphany moment. I was like, she sees every disagreement as a fight. She sees everything where we don't see, we're not perfectly agreeable, as a fight. So she immediately gets defensive when she doesn't fully agree with something and goes into fight mode against me. Oh. And then I was like, wow. The level of trauma that someone would have to immediately see everything as a disagreement, as conflict, and someone trying to harm you, and that you need to immediately defend yourself or fight back. I just had this deeper understanding of generational trauma, and I was like, okay, my eyes opened a little bit. And so I've reconnected with my mom at this point. We had a nice 4-hour long conversation, and she basically heard me for the first time. And there was this epiphany moment where I saw in her the first time I've ever seen a connection of, oh my gosh, I did something. This is something I could have done different. This is something I did incorrectly, or I had remorse or something. And one of the things is she just nitpick and criticize me constantly over who I was and all of these things. And during this journey too, that I'd been disconnected from her, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And so all of these things that were like, oh gosh, Taylor, why are you like this? Was a lot of symptoms of my ADHD, and I'm just a neurodivergent goofball, okay? Like, this is who I am. I talk loud, I leave things out, like, I'm messy sometimes. Like, I am this messy, imperfect human, and I have a messy brain sometimes, but I also have a beautiful, brilliant brain. And my mom is very much like level headed, no emotions, pretty stoic. Like she's Capricorn vibes all the way through, which like cool for her. But I am a Pisces sun with a Gemini moon and a Sagittarius North Node. So anyone knows anything about astrology, I am like, I'm out there. Okay. And very dynamic and bubbly and not as grounded, unfortunately. Okay. Very creative, but not always the most grounded. And it doesn't help that CPTSD and ADHD impacted my brain in that way because, like, didn't do me any favors, universe. Could have given me a little bit more. But anyway, so I was talking to my mom and during this conversation, I was really vulnerable and I was like crying at one point. And I was like, when you constantly criticize me, it reminds me of that little girl who would run for help and would immediately be dismissed and told that she was the problem. And so everything that you say negative to me doesn't impact adult me. It just hurts that child inside me. And she paused. And I was like, in the passive aggressive comments and the defensiveness and under your breath, I'm like, it hurts. It hurts really deep down to that inner child. And she just like looked away for a second and her eyes lit up and she was just like, oh, that's like my mother. And she, for the first time that I can remember, and she might have apologized before, but she looked at me and she said, I'm so sorry. And tears started forming in her eyes. And like, I don't think anyone understands how big this is. My mom is not emotional. She cries at like puppies on the television, but anything with her personal life, anything with her, she's just not emotional. And like, it kind of was like a running joke. I was like, haha, I'm the emotional, like I'm the sentimental one, whatever. She just was not emotionally available for me for so long. And so I just saw this like potential progress. And so anyways, like I was hesitant and I was boundaried and all of those things. And like I said, I'm going to do a full episode on that. But essentially what ended up happening is I got her reconnected back in my life. And at the same time, I'm doing really good therapy and I'm trying to figure out all of these things with this chronic illness that's like up and down. I'm being disabled. I am not my best self. My self-esteem is just horrible. It just like plummets because I'm getting rashes all over my face and I am stuck in bed and my brain isn't working the same. And just all, it was just, it's been a miserable time and it's still not back to what my baseline was. But it's a little bit better, but it was just like, I went from all of the work that I did. I see myself, love myself, know myself, trust myself, no matter what I look like, no matter if I'm wearing makeup, no matter my weight, anything, to what is wrong with you. All of those self wounds just came right back so hard. Between the past that came back, there were some that like came back and I was like, no, thank you. There was some like revisiting just mentally and emotionally where, I really was just thinking of, ooh, I wish I would have shown up better in this relationship, or an understanding of different wounds and being like, I reacted in this way because of this, and that's not fair to them. Sometimes I'd reach out to apologize. Sometimes I didn't, because some people, if you open that door, it's not a fun door to open. There was one that I reached out to and said sorry, and I'm glad that they didn't respond back because that could have been a slippery slope at that point. But anyways, I was just very, very reflective and nostalgic in my own actions and how things kind of happened. And it led to everything coming up in my body. Before I stopped and got sick, I was in a relationship. And this was about probably the year before that. So almost a whole year prior, after I got injured. And so yippee-ki-yay. I don't even know if that's okay to say. Gosh, this is hard. This is so hard. So I was in a relationship. I jumped into a relationship really fast. And I went online dating. Goodness gracious. I've never really felt aligned with online dating. And I found this guy and we talked. Like, he called almost immediately and he was like, wow, I'm really impressed by you. He had a master's. He was like, he just was like, honestly, like, seemed like my my perfect person. He was writing a book, which I'm a sucker for. Um, like there's just like things where I was just like, wow, he's like, I'm really big into self-development. I love Brene Brown and like all of these things. And I was like, oh, therapy, man. He's like, I love my therapist. And I was just like, sign me up. Okay. But also at the same time, I was triggered because I was in a sticky situation at my work where I realized my boss was grooming me. He was a male. It's like a husband and wife duo where I worked. Anyways, and so it kind of got to the point where there was a whole story basically where like the husband invited me to lunch and like framed it as like a work thing. And I was in the office and the wife, who was my main boss, was like, okay, we're getting we're getting ready for this like audit. Can you come in this next day? This would be your day off. And I was like, there was a bunch of people, like other staff in the office. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. I just have lunch plans, but I can come after. And everyone was like, ooh, what's your lunch plans? I'm like, don't worry about it. And because this guy is like, don't tell anyone in the office. I don't want you to think you're getting special treatment, but I want to talk to you about your podcast and everything. Because they were kind of doing something similar. And I was like, wow, that's really nice. And at this point, again, no contact with the family, didn't really have support, all of that. Anyways, so I went back afterwards and I talked to the woman and I was like, you know that lunch was with your husband, right? And she went, oh. And then I went up and I started doing my thing and I was in the middle of work and I looked out and you could see them talking and it seemed very confrontational and not okay. And then on the ride back, the husband called me and was essentially like, I thought you weren't going to tell anyone about our business. And I was like, what? And I was just like shocked because to me, like we're literally just talking about like whatever. And I look back and there were honestly some things. They would like call me at weird times of videos and was like, hey, what are you doing? You want to come over? And I'm just thinking like, because these people actually like, oh my gosh, you don't really have a lot of family. Like we're here to support you, like all of this. And I was like, wow, that's really nice. But I realized I got myself in a really not okay situation. Later looking back, I know people who know them and it doesn't always have the best reputation. Someone was like, did they treat you okay? They have a reputation. And I was like, ugh. Things I wish I would have known going in. But anyways, there was no HR department. There was no whatever. And so I was kind of iced out. Wasn't going to help me professionally. Got to be a really hostile workplace. And, the only thing I responded to that man was, I didn't think you meant your wife. And again, I was on the phone driving home, didn't really record anything, which I wish I wouldn't have answered. But anyways, I just saw a new version of this person where it was like I was in a work environment where it felt like very safe and like family and like, all the red flags. And I was like doing some really, really cool things. And then it just got hostile really fast. And he basically was like, can't trust you, can't do all these things. Like, nah, nah, nah. It's like, she's really mad. She thinks that there's something up and there's nothing going on. And now you made it look like this. And I'm like, I didn't do anything. You didn't tell your wife that you were hanging out with another woman. And I was thinking this is a business, like, again, and it was just messy. And anyways, so I ended up doing whatever I could because I was still stuck in a contract. I was like, I need to show that I'm not a threat to this woman because like this woman is my boss, right? And I'm like, ew, first, and like, they're so much older than me and shorter than me. And like that's, I'm just like, ugh, no, like there was never any like this. To me, this person is my boss, period. And they were someone who had connections in the podcasting industry and was going to help me out. That was it. But I jumped into online dating and as fast as I could, I didn't realize, yes, I was triggered by that one thing, but I didn't realize how much I was in a trauma response still as I was going through online dating. And long story short, I attracted someone in that energy that I missed some big red flags. And, I fell so hard for the man that I started dating. Like it takes a lot for me to be interested in someone. But when I do, I fall hard and I fall fast. And I think there was a part of me that was just like anyone. And as fast as I can make this public, like I put it on my Instagram really fast, like within a week or two. Just to show that I wasn't a threat. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so into this guy. At the same time, I was into this guy. Like it was definitely like a crush. And I have never vibed with anyone so much in my entire life. Like we just like clicked to the point where my roommate was like, I am going to be writing a speech for your wedding, aren't I? Like you just belong together. Yeah. And we went on a trip to Sedona, like 2 weeks after meeting. I was like, this is crazy, whatever. It was like sharing location. I was like, I don't know, just like I just really like this guy. I just like try it out, like throw it out there and like whatever. And like he threw it out there first and I was like, no, that's crazy. And then I really wanted to go to Sedona and I was like, well, I kind of love Sedona. Maybe you'll see my woo woo side and whatever. And I just fell so hard. Like charismatic and smart and similar music tastes and just goofy and I could just be myself and just like inner child was out. Just like the man adored me. Intimacy was wonderful. Like it was just like, oh, it felt like a dream come true. Shortly after we got back from Sedona, I put our relationship on this social media. And I wish I hadn't done that, but I did. Um, Anyways, so our relationship lasted maybe a couple months. I started noticing some things, like he would say some things that were like holes in stories and just there was some lying or something being held back. Um, and I realized that there was something more than he wasn't telling me. Looking back, there was like on his online profile said he was 31, it was actually 37, and I was like, oh, I just must have read it wrong. Like there was a lot of gaslighting going on. I was so triggered. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is amazing. Like I don't even care. Like I wasn't looking for signs. Um, but essentially what ended up happening is we broke it off because I broke up with him after he was triggered after an incident that happened in his personal life and started drinking and like drinking to the point where he like went on like bender party whatever and like disappeared for like 24 to 48 hours. I was just like not okay. It was like in a very not okay mental state. And I had just come from a relationship, which he knew about at this point, that was impacted partially by their substance use. And it's not something I have not had anything to drink since. And like I think I've had like a drink once or twice, but I don't drink. Um, and so knowing that, at this point, I felt like this guy was my person. And again, like 2 months in, I cannot believe that I was just like, oh my gosh, but I was. And I broke it off. And it was with the intention to be like, hey, I really like you. And this man really, really did too. To this day, I still believe there were things that I can look back, I can see were lies, but there were other things that I could see like this man was obsessed with me and I was also obsessed with him. He was just hiding something. So after we broke up, with the intention of you need to heal. I can't tell you what to do. It was right before, it's literally right while I was launching the Overcoming the Foundations course. Oh my gosh. And I, just I was like, okay. And he's like, I love you. It's you and I at the end of this. He was like, I want to stop drinking. I want to stop doing all these things. I will get it together. It's you and me at the end of this. Like it's us. Like I really want this to happen. And I was like, all right, well, you got to show me. And I'm like, and I'm not going to hold myself back. Like if I meet someone, I meet someone. Like, and I felt like I was handling it really mature. And there's a lot more to that story. And I will give a full rundown of that relationship. But anyway, long story short, we were supposed to, after we broke up, there were a few weeks in and we were planning to kind of meet up for coffee as friends, just to kind of check in, see how things were doing. He didn't respond to me that day. And instead he posted on Instagram with another girl at a vineyard, which basically said, the only thing that I love more than this vineyard and this wine is this girl, which was just weeks after we broke up, like not very long after he told me it's you and I at the end of this, blah, 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 whatever. And so I was like, oh, okay. And then I kind of noticed that there were some things that were like made me feel kind of gross in my stomach, like that pullback ick, like that danger warning sign, but I ignored while I was in the relationship with him, which I wish I hadn't. But anyways, and I just decided to look up his full name and his real birthday because based on that, because I'm not big on online dating, and trust is a huge thing for me. I was at the point before this where I wasn't going, like, I checked him out and I didn't see anything on like background search for anything. So I was like, oh, kind of a popular name, whatever, like probably not a big thing. Um, he purposely didn't want anyone to be able to find him. So, anyways, I pull his name and his birthday and where he's from in Google. And the first thing that comes up is a sex offender registration. The next thing that comes up is a news article talking about how this individual was in California, was on a group board messaging something, inquiring on social media about family incest, and was caught by an undercover cop on a way to meet a minor to abuse them. And this was who I thought I was going to marry, and I was obsessed with, and I was in love with. I dated and fell deeply in love for a hidden child sexual predator. And I hold a lot of shame for that. I didn't know very clearly, and if I had known, there's absolutely zero way. But it kind of awoke something in me, which brings me back to this past year, that like uh, all of these relationship wounds came up in my life. How I'd acted before, how I'd seen things, all the red flags I've missed, the feeling of I was safe until I wasn't. That started when I was in a relationship with my best friend from high school, and then we got into a romantic relationship, and it just wasn't the same level of emotional safety, and in fact got scary in other ways and toxic and not okay. And I just feel like since that relationship with him, it kind of set me on this page of like, well, you're not safe anywhere. Forget all men. And then I found this perfect, wonderful man who swept me off my feet, had all his money and flew me everywhere. And we would travel together. And he was so sweet and kind to me. He had a little bit of temper when it comes to other people in his life and boss. And he would drink sometimes. And, but it was all okay. And I kept justifying it. And even with all of that, I would have never in my entire life thought that he would be someone who is capable of assaulting a child. But the proof was right in front of me. And the amount of times that he lied was right in front of me. So, anyways, he was from California, and he had a California car registered there. And there was one thing that happened where he mentioned something, an incident happened, and he was like, oh, they won't be able to connect me here. Like, I'm fine. Like, no one will be able to find me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He was kind of drunk, and I kind of got some flags. And then I looked it up. So basically, he was registered in California as a sex offender. Oh, and by the way, on this registration, he said his birthday was 3/23 is when we like. It's like I'm a woo woo girl, okay? I pulled out all the astrology charts. It was like meant for each other, soulmates, all the thing. Oh my gosh, you guys love each other in the same language, blah blah blah, all the things. Okay, it was like destined to be together. This is your person. Like everything said that. He lied about that. His birthday is my birthday. I don't know what he was going to do later in life when all of that, but like we literally share the same birthday. And that I think is the hardest thing for me to deal with, is how sickening and just like, ugh, like I can feel it in my stomach right now, just like pulling me like, ugh, like there's anything that is similar between me and that human. And again, I have such a hard time, even now, like I've worked through a lot of this, but even now, seeing the man that I dated and the man that came out afterwards as the same person. Like, anyways, so all that happened. And I ended up reporting it to the police because I was the only one who knew where he actually lived. I was the only one who knew where he actually worked. I was his girlfriend. And, like it kind of got to the point where like he was like, oh, we're going to stop by my work and pick up my laptop or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like we were together all the time. We traveled. Like I said, we were very close in that short amount of time. And so I knew everything. I knew all the things. I knew how to connect the dots. I knew how to prove where he was, and I reported it. Afterwards, he made some very vague threats on his social media status after he blocked me. And it got scary. And he also went to a self-development seminar, which he said he was going to after we broke up, before he got arrested, because there was a huge period of time where they were just trying to find him, and they couldn't because he travels all the time for work. And basically, the person who nominated him as a sponsor got a call that he left in the middle of the first day, was really upset. They checked in with him, and he said that I was this horrible person, and he couldn't believe that I had been through this program like this when I was so horrible and so horrible to him and all of these things. And I was like, what? So deeply upset. And so anyways, he basically later told that mutual person that I need to watch out, and he's going to come after me, and he's going to ruin my life. And here comes all the trauma from the past of being raised by a narcissist and threatening my life, and how Survivors Overcoming Silence was born, because everyone, I swear, has threatened to kill me. It's fine, but here I am still speaking loudly, right? Even if my voice shakes. Yeah, so that was really hard. But I moved out of the place that he knew. I have a protected address. He's safe. I'm safe. He can't find me. It's taken me a long time. So anyways, that happened. And there was just something in my body that awoke after that. And I was just like, oh my gosh. So I looked at all my relationship wounds and how I showed up. And then I also, without knowing it, and then I started getting sick. Like I said, got COVID a couple times, just started getting down really sick, really long, and it was lingering, okay? And then I hurt myself physically, and then all this chronic illness stuff, and I now have 8 diagnoses at the end of all of this. But during that time also, I got to the point of, I don't even know how to say this. What happened with the man that I dated, being a child sexual predator, connected me to wounds that I didn't know I had. And I'm sure you could assume, like I said, I will talk about this later. But an EMDR brought up repressed memories. And there was a reason that the adults SA I was unable to get into an EMDR before. And just after this, it was the hardest moment of therapy I've ever had to deal with, of life, of everything. And it woke up so much in my body and in my brain, and the feeling of unsafety and just not okay. And it led me down to realizing like why we talked about in the last episode before I took my break, why I showed up in relationships the way I did, and why it was so normalized that I was around predators my entire life. And it was, oh, it's just who they are. They're not harmful. They're not whatever. And they are. And they were. And I went for this spiral of, I hate all men. All men are unsafe. Forget everyone. I'm just gonna be a lesbian. Can I be a lesbian? Does that work? Doesn't work. I'm not wired that way. But I like went to extremes of everything in my subconscious was like, I'm swearing, like I'm just gonna die alone. I'm not gonna date again. Like I'm broken. I'm unable to do this, like all of this stuff. And I got this really big guard up. Not only did I get fooled, and I teach people about these types of people, okay? Like I teach people like, this is what to look for. These are those red flags. Like I fell so deep in love and fell for the guise of a child sex predator who was convicted, been in jail, registered, and shared my birthday. I'm the one who fell for that, okay? There is so much shame in that. Like, what part of me, and then there was like, when I was like, what part of me attracted this? And I don't always believe that like you attract everything, but like, again, my brain was trying to be like, if I can make this me, this feels more safe. If it was someone else, I can't control someone else, but if I can make this me, this makes it more safe. And then I was looking at whatever, and I have this pattern that I didn't realize continued into my relationships. I have relational, it's like emotional unavailability. Okay. And so when I was in a household where I was unable to get out, I was not safe, and there was nothing anyone can do, I would go into this like fantasy brain, and I would make things seem with like the most rose-colored glasses you could think of, okay? Like the deepest, thickest cut. I would make it seem like everything was okay. and I was happy and I was whatever. And it doesn't, again, it does not help that I'm a Pisces, okay? Like I got the Delulu and the daydreaming on point, but that got me through life. And that got me through the hardest moments of my life. And I didn't realize that when I feel unsafe in life, that I jump to that. And so I did that. And I like delulued a whole like, oh, maybe I feel something about this person, and just like create like this idea of someday my prince will come. And what if it's this guy I met on the corner? What if it's this guy that I met 2 times? What if whatever? And I'm just like, it felt so much safer to create this fantasy relationship and idea of being with a man than facing the fear of all men feel unsafe to me. Because all men, even if they look nice, even if they seem nice, they are predators. And they're just waiting for you to be vulnerable and take advantage of that. And while I don't believe that now, that's where my core wounds and all of the things had led me. Because my entire life broke open, and I saw from the beginning that I was never safe, and no man in my life was ever safe. And that is so hard to sit with. But anyway, so I've been in situationship-ish, whatever, on again, off again. Oh, it'll be us someday. Like I've talked about that weird relationship in my life before. Like I've really recognized my patterns as a human, and the fawn until the defensiveness and the fantasy that was safer than the reality, and all of these things on top of processing some really deep trauma. That wasn't even just the man that I did it. That alone, like I'm still getting into that. Like that man, like he did a number on me. And he was only in there for a couple months. Like just in my life, just a couple months. That I have never felt that way about someone in my entire life. I dated my best friend. I've been in other, like I have never felt that strongly for someone. And the shame that that person is a child sexual predator. And were playing me. Like, Taylor got. Anyway, so that happened. And that's something that I've been afraid to share on here, not only because my own shame, but also because I was afraid that they would retaliate and they would make good on their promise that they would try and ruin me or come after me. And I don't need any more people trying to come after me, okay? I do the right thing, even when it's really hard, even when I'm being threatened. And I know things can trigger me more. Like I will do anything to protect anyone else. And I was the only one who knew about all the stuff with that guy. So that's why I did what I did. As I was like, I cannot, whatever. And then karma brought us back together again at Costco. Luck would have it. A year later, I was right behind him. And I was getting all kinds of signs that day. It was weird because it was like I was supposed to leave. Oh no, something came up. I was supposed to leave. Oh no, something came up. It was like the exact timing. I only had a couple things in my cart. Pretty sure I went to get dog food or whatever. And then you know where you're like waiting on that way out to Costco and they like check your receipts and make sure whatever. So it was him and 2 other guys, and they were wearing like work shirts. And I thought it was him, but I was like, there's no way, there's no way, there's no way. He was wearing like a mental health organization shirt, okay? And it looked like it was like a mental health facility, and they were like stocked, like a cart full of all of these snacks and whatever. And having worked at one of those facilities, I'm like, that's exactly what's happening. He kind of turns his head, like, you know, just looking behind him, whatever. And then he saw me, and I saw him see me, and I froze. And he turned back around. And he got really quiet. I was like, he's like, we gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go. And I got a really good parking spot, and intuitively I just knew exactly what to do. Like I was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I was like, I need to make sure that I didn't just imagine this. Like this happened. This guy is not supposed to be anywhere near here. I was like, this happened, okay? And this is a year after I reported. So the dude should be in freaking jail or something. But anyways, so I ended up driving down that exact aisle. I found exactly where they were. I knew where to go. I don't know how I knew where to go. Like I wasn't going up and down aisles. I just like knew where to go. So I did, and I drew a slow drive by, and I had my phone out the side, and I was recording the entire time. And it was him. And not only was it him, he was wearing a shirt that was very clearly his work shirt that said what organization he worked for. And it was a 24-hour mental health facility. And the location that I looked up that was nearest to there included youth. Now, I don't know how this man keeps getting hired in things like this, but he was working at a youth mental health organization. And again, I was like, do I do this? Do I do this? Do I do this? And I think this is really when all the trauma in my body came up, is when I had to face this again, as I faced the justice system again. I reported again. I not only went to his new boss and I said, here's everything that I know. Here's the screenshots of this. Here's the context of how I know him. Here's whatever. Like, this person is a child sexual predator. And I don't know how they're working for you, but they need to not be. And I never heard back from that. So I'm hoping that justice was served and everyone is safe there, because that just makes me sick to my stomach. But that happened, and my body started shutting down shortly after that. That was right around the same time that I hurt myself, where my shoulder got hurt. And I'm honestly pretty sure that that's why that happened, because I was so dissociated and out of my body. It's been one heck of a year. So anyways, that happened. And then I was sitting with a lot of shame and a lot of anxiety. And if you're watching me right now, I'm literally like shaking my foot, and my body is bobbing, because it's hard, still hard for me to talk about. But I think it's really important. And this healing journey was full of EMDR, and all kinds of things with the chronic illness stuff. Like, as my body started shutting down, like I said, COVID was a part of it. I was recently diagnosed with long COVID, mast cell activation. POTS is suspected. I do have POTS symptoms. They just haven't tested positive for that yet, as I haven't done full workups of that. Dysautonomia, which is another one of those like shutdown of the autonomic nervous system. That's another one that I'm going to be tested for, that I have all the symptoms for, that hasn't happened yet. And I just have even idiopathic hypersomnia, where my brain doesn't function. It's super tired and whatever, and like cognitive issues and cognitive decline and word finding issues, and like, gosh, all these freaking things. And all of this in my body started coming up shortly after I saw that guy, like really intensely. I had a really big flare after seeing that guy in public, the second time, after I had already reported the dude and had to do so a second time. Okay. And at this point I was like, this guy is really going to kill me. This guy is really going to kill me. And I was going to go back. I was like, if this guy tries to contact me or says anything or threaten anything, I'm going to get a restraining order. The only reason I didn't get a restraining order in the first place was because the court system is my biggest fear. It was used against me, weaponized against me by my primary abuser. Like I said, he was a narcissist, and one of the things he did was use the courts and justice system. And so this is the most triggering thing, to deal with the court system, that I don't have to. And so I just ended up moving instead. Luckily, the dude never contacted me, and I hope he never does. Because I can't. And like I said, I had such strong feelings for this guy. Like, I don't know. I can't, I'm very still confused at this moment. Like, how did the same human exist in the same, I mean, obviously so much of it was fake. Like, I get that, but I was just like, you can't fake those feelings. Like that was not, anyways, drunk out of his mind. He was like aggressive to the rest of the world. And then just like the sweetest, most gentle to me, and just like literally like totally blacked out. I'm gonna marry you, I love you, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just, I've just never, anyways, high trauma, how are you? Okay, so that happened. And then obviously I stopped dating. Yeah. Not only physically was I dealing with a lot, and like I said, my body shutting down and all of that, but if it wasn't physically, it was mentally. If it wasn't mentally, it was emotionally. And if it wasn't emotionally, it was relationally. And if it wasn't relationally, then it was repressed trauma. And I just kept hitting this like, stop. I'd be like, okay, I start wanting to get some energy and some passion again. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do this. And it's like, no, pulls me back. Like I said, financially limited. Everything was just like blocked. And I was like, I finally had to lean into the stage of like acceptance. Like, when so many things happen that are just like out of your control and ridiculous and the worst and just like inconvenient, and it's just like, what else can happen? Like, I was at a point where I was just laughing every time the littlest thing would happen. I was like, of course that's happening. What else? I started having panic attacks every time I would go in a doctor's office. I started like, I couldn't even think about the idea of dating again. People would ask me what I was up to, or like how my dating life has been. I was like, and I would literally just like jokingly be like, well, last time I dated a child sexual predator. And they're like, what? Like, I was like, we don't talk about that. But there's been this shift in, that all of that is like a longer summary than I wanted to, but high ADHD brain. A summary of the past year. of the past coming back, the past wounds coming up, the ways that things have impacted me physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and myself. And I have felt this shift, and I'm very grateful for this shift. But there is just a pull. And during this whole time, I did not want to be online. I almost deleted this account and everything and gave up on absolutely everything SOS this entire time. I was like, I can't face this. I can't do this. I thought I was at the top of the mountain in regards to my healing, and I just went so fast in all aspects. Like, what is wrong with me? What am I doing wrong? And I've realized I'm not doing anything wrong. I am a complex trauma survivor, and healing is linear and it is layered. And the reason that it is not linear and it is layered is because trauma is layered. There are so many pieces to the puzzle and so many things that we may not realize are connected to other things in our brain or core wounds or whatever. And then something happens that brings up this thing. And I'm not going to say this happens to everyone, as I don't want to scare people. There was something that came up where there was a time where I didn't remember anything in my life except for pictures and things that I get filled in. And so I was just like, oh no, my trauma started later. It started at like around like 10. And I got a little bit more. I was like, yeah, maybe like 7. My trauma has been there. I grew up in a very unsafe house. I was abused at a very young age in all possible ways. It is disturbing. And it is disheartening. And it is one of those things that my body, because of what happened and who I dated, brought up my past that I didn't remember, which connected to me being 22 and being assaulted by a father type figure that was non-biologically related, but in my mind was going to walk me down the aisle. And all of the relationship wounds and the times that I fawned with men and the times that I just dealt with the toxicity and men objectifying me and just all of these things that I just put up with because I was like, well, this is just how guys are. Until I got really resentful and I like went hardcore lashback, like in total fight mode, total out of control. And then my cutoff game was strong with everything. It was like, well, if I can't do that, then I'm going to flight. I was in fawn for so long with any man. And then all of a sudden, I just dipped. And if I didn't dip out, then I would go into a fantasy of this person who I've actually never really connected with is the love of my life. I'm going to make these things happen. I'm going to feel all these things. I'm just going to be Delulu and it's going to be happy and fun and everything's okay. And so again, I had to work through that pattern. And while I went from my guards being up more than ever that I can remember in my adult life, like all the level of healing and all the things that I'd done, and my guard was up really high after all of that. And like I said, self-loathing and not even being able to look in the mirror and know who I was. Like it was just so much happening. Just everything was so hard. And I have started softening. There is this light inside of me that since I've kind of made these connections and since I've been sharing and then as I step into this next journey of overcoming, that is starting to shine again in places that I never thought it could, in ways that I never thought were possible. And while it did come out in anxiety sometimes, of like, oh, we got to do this thing, we got to do this thing, I'm healing. And in that, the hard exterior that was put for protection is softening again. I am being more vulnerable again with myself. I have vulnerability in my relationships. I have reciprocity. I am in a very safe and stable job. I am in a really good place. And after all of that, I am exploring dating again. I know, it's really scary. But I've realized the error of all of my ways. and why I showed up the way I did and all of these things that I did. And I've been working through and healing a whole lot of that. And I don't ever want to say healed because I don't believe there's an end point, but I will say that I have made significant progress. And I am taking a new perspective to dating and relationships just in general from the people that I like cut off and then have come back into my life and integrated in a new way and making new foundations. Like I have learned how to create slower, grounded, conscious steps forward and rebuilding a strong foundation. I used to just rush everything and my anxiety would be like, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Every relationship, every job, I would just be like, oh yeah, my intuition feels it. And like I still have really strong intuition. I really do. And I do think that were a couple of the relationships or just ideas of things where it was like I went so delulu and off the deep end. I don't think that all of that was in my head. I think there was some truth to something, but I think my trauma brain took a story and ran with it and made it something else that it was. And that's happened to me far too many times than I care to admit, and I see now. And so I know my patterns. I know what I need to do more. And I've recognized that like whenever I've gotten into a relationship that has not been good for me, I stopped listening to my intuition and I started giving people the benefit of the doubt or giving them excuses because I wish that people would have seen me. I'm like, well, I have all these things that are hard and I'm actually a really spectacular person. And I actually have all of this value and I have whatever. So if I just like write someone off right away and I cut them off, then I'm not giving him a chance. Like I wish someone would give me. And so I then got to this point where I stopped seeing the red flags. I got to the rose colored glasses. I started excusing them. And even when I would see them and sometimes confront them, I wouldn't do everything that I needed to do. I still would kind of be in like a fawn people pleasing mode. Like I don't want to get backlash from this. So I would just kind of slowly bring it up. And it wasn't very true to myself. And it was honestly a form of self-abandonment. So as I am softening into dating again and opening my heart again in just any relationship in general, I'm feeling really good. I never thought I would be back on these dating apps again, but I'm back. So far, it has not been as bad. Like sometimes it's like really vulgar and like you're like, who, why? And it's just like bottom of the barrel. There've actually been some like pretty decent, from what I can tell, ideas and potential foundations. You never know. Um, I told my friends that I am open to dating again. People are like, oh, I can hook you up with this person would be great for you, and blah blah blah. Like people are just like, oh, I have an idea for this, and I have an idea, and I'm like, okay, guys. And so I also am sitting with this discomfort of I feel really immature in my life and some of the things that I've experienced at 31 years of age, like dealing with and having to be like, oh, I'm gonna date again. You know what I mean? Like I just feel very little kiddish. And it's just not, this is not my reflection on how I feel about anyone else. It's just myself. This is just my self-belief. Like my logic brain is like, that's nothing. Like you're just figuring out there's no shame in dating or having fun. There's no shame in trying to figure out what you want. There's no shame in focusing on other things or needing to heal or whatever it is. Like there's no shame in any of this. But my trauma is like, I feel so insecure. And the idea of dating and someone looking at me and deciding my worth and if, you know, if I would be a good fit for them just like makes my skin want to crawl. And even more than that, trusting myself. But I will say that I have started this whole journey, and I am doing it differently. I am listening to my intuition. I am being very slow and grounded. I already like disconnected with someone who was really, I really liked. I was like, oh, we're getting along pretty well. And they were immediately like, after 2 days, like, oh my gosh, I really like you. I'm deleting all these apps. Like, I'm whatever. And I was like, whoa, friend. And I realized like, wow, they reflect a lot of where I was in my past, not only in dating patterns, but also where they were in their entire life, like their own whatever. And so I recognized that and I was able to be like, hey, like this isn't going to work. And this is why, because I know you would like an explanation. And I was like, wow, that was a really good mirror and a reflection of like how I showed up in dating. And I could also see how a predator could just go like that. Like at that point, I wasn't thinking. I was just like, ooh, romance. chance this man's gonna save me? Like, you know what I mean? And so I definitely was at that point where I was like, well, I'm feeling my heart open again. I'm feeling better in my life. My health is improving. I'm starting to understand why I am the way I am. Like basically this entire journey this past year and a half to two has really brought me back to be like, I make sense. The things that I felt shame about for myself, I make sense. The things that I was having a hard time with and these patterns that I didn't understand, this makes sense. This awakening of all of these trauma and how I handled this and how I was treated and all of these things, like this makes sense why this pattern exists in my life. And since that, I've been able to be like, you know what? I'm consciously breaking this pattern. And I am. I can see it happening in front of me and other people are noticing as well in my life. Like the pattern is changing. That I am not stuck in this immature trauma response. I am not stuck in just fantasy brain or jumping straight in and not looking into any flags in relationships. I'm not stuck in continuously jumping into these toxic relationships. I'm not stuck when someone makes a mistake that immediately I justify and it's like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Even if they're unsafe in my body, I am listening to my intuition every step of the way. I am more connected to myself than I ever have been. And things are not perfect, but I can tell you right now, I'm in the most stable position in my entire life right now, and I have ever been. And there are times where my anxiety is like, oh, the world's falling apart, everything's falling apart. Like it's like, and even when the chronic illness that just pops up and it's just going to totally derail me, even when the repressed memory stuff, like all of this, like mentally and emotionally, I'm so in tune with my truest self. And I see, and I have like not only taken the shadows that have come up, but I've like worked to integrate them. I see them, I acknowledge them, I appreciate them. And I'm able to move forward in a way that is like, okay, it was not perfect. I made a lot of mistakes. I would love to make amends with some people. Some of it is just like, it's not worth opening that door because it's messy. But, or anyone who's listening who I've done you wrong, or for, my trauma responses came out or anything that, it just wasn't the right vibe or whatever happened, please know that I am sorry. And my goal is never to make anyone feel uncomfortable. And I understand why I acted the way I did. It doesn't excuse it, but I do want to say that I'm sorry. And especially, when it comes to the relationship with a lot of the other, like when, the work thing where it was definitely a predatory thing and I was definitely being groomed. The dude where the guy was lying to me and was hiding a very awful past, where all of this, like none of that was my fault. But my response of when I was in a trauma response after that and the things that I did afterwards were not always aligned with my true self. And I would say most of the time were not. They were a walking trauma response. And so I did make mistakes and I did, I was more harsh with some people and I was just like extra protective and aggressive and, all of those things afterwards. And then all of that self-shame on me after. So, and on top of this, my primary abuser is just watching my page and waiting. For what? So as we move into this next stage of overcoming the podcast, of survivors overcoming silence, going from overcoming the silence in your entire life to living loud, owning yourself, being your authentic self, loving yourself, saying, hey, this happened to me and this is not okay. Saying that, you know what, I made these mistakes and this is not okay and I'm going to take accountability for that, but here's how I'm moving forward. We're speaking loudly and healing and living loudly because we nearly died in that silence, disconnected from ourselves, people not believing us, the victim blaming, the traumas that we had to take that were stuck in our body that maybe we didn't even realize at the time what they were. Or those of us who did end up realizing and started asking for help and got nothing, denying, blaming, gaslighting, attacked, all of those things. We are going from overcoming silence to living loudly. And if I, as the founder and face of Survivors Overcoming Silence, if I am not doing that in my life, I am a hypocrite. Why would I be telling and empowering other survivors to do that? And so one of the ways that I've done this, and I've sat with myself, I told myself that I would never, ever, ever tell this story. I have since released the shame and I realized that's what it was. That there was still a part of my younger self that felt maybe this was my fault. And I know it's not. And logically, when you hear everything, you will know it's not. Like, there's no one in their right mind who could say that. However, moving forward, I am going to be living loudly. And that includes telling the truth, the whole truth, regardless of who is threatening me, regardless of who is watching. And my hope is that I inspire other people in their lives to be able to heal and reclaim themselves and their life, regardless of the people who are trying to stop them. Because as I have said many times on here, we all have our own unique light. And that is like a lighthouse that guides us back to our truest self. It's like our inner child is our lighthouse that brings us into that like core self, that shining light right within. It's like our soul, our sense of self, our highest self, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes we can't find that light until we find the shadows to say, wait, that's where that's shining. And then that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that light, that true self, that soul, that shines so bright that it impacts everything around it. It illuminates other things, people. People are magnetized to that light, the ones that are supposed to find that light. And then your light just might shine so brightly that it inspires other people and helps them find their own. And that's what I hope that I'm doing in sharing the stories in full and owning up to the things that I have done in my own trauma responses and all of those things, that I'm going from being guarded and stuck in the dark to softening and illuminating and being open to possibilities that I didn't think I would ever get back to. But I deserve a grounded golden retriever man who's going to love me and accept me and deal with all of this goofy neurodivergent woo-woo meets science geek. Like, I'm here for it. My future person will be here for it. And I am not going to let my past hold me back. And also my past patterns. So this is just a long-winded way of saying that the overcoming journey is messy. And moving forward, I am going to be sharing all that I have held back because I am ready. And I know that it's an important part of not only my own journey, but I think it will bring up really, really important topics and nuances and things that I have gained new perspective in this past year to two that I really want to bring forward and share with the survivor community, because I really was sharing in black and white and saying, oh yeah, there's nuances. But I was like, no, this is my situation, therefore this is it. And then people will be like, oh, there's nuances. And I'm like, yeah, there's some, but this doesn't apply to me. So ha ha, it did apply to me in many ways. And I am hoping that as we move forward, that you continue to see that, yeah, I'm just a messy, perfectly imperfect human who has complex trauma, who happens to know quite a lot and makes mistakes and has been through her own really, really dark shadows. And it's not always easy. I'm not always perfect. I'm missing deadlines. I'm all of these things. My body is what it is. But I am in a stage of acceptance with all of the grief and all of the things that I have done this past year, especially. I am in a stage of acceptance. And past acceptance, I'm at a place of hope, which was scary because every single time that I seem to get there, it seems to be just like crushed by something else. Like I said, if it's not physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, it's all the things. Like there was something happening at every point of last year alone that just limited me and pulled me back. And I was just like, am I cursed? Is there something I'm doing wrong? Was there someone who was just like kind of like a voodoo doll? It was like, ooh, let's poke this one, this point, this joint out. Ooh, let's make him have this issue. Ooh, da, da, da. I'm like, oh, maybe. Joking. But it just really felt like it was just like the universe was pulling out every stop it could to be like, look at yourself, stop moving, and do this. And face yourself. You are able to overcome this, and you are supposed to share your story. The last thing that I'm going to mention is when I was in therapy a couple weeks ago, and I was talking about the shame of all the things that I've experienced, and I'm like judging myself for the way my body's functioning now and all of these things. And she was like, well, how do you get through that? And one thing I said is I sharing my story loudly for all to hear. That sharing is releasing that shame. And I've started doing that in my personal life. And that is a huge intention of me doing here. Not only releasing the shame in myself, which I have worked a lot through, but also helping others release the shame in themselves and recognizing that it is not your fault. You are worthy in all seasons and you deserve wonderful, beautiful things. You're allowed to be an imperfect, messy human. And guess what? You're going to make mistakes, especially if you have complex trauma, because that's what was modeled to you your entire life. So you had to learn in survival mode and you had to move forward in survival mode in ways that it was just like, I just need to live. So if you're just thinking about living and you're just thinking about safety all the time, you're not always consciously thinking about the consequences of your actions on yourself or others. You're just doing the thing and you're just getting through and you're having to be okay with that. So I will continue to share a lot more, like each little pieces of the story that I shared over the last year. There's a lot more that comes to each of it. All of those will have their own episode. Chronic illness will absolutely have at least 2 episodes this season. But I invite you to stay tuned and to check out the social media pages if you haven't. SOS with Dr. Taelor, Taelor, Overcoming Pod, everything. Again, thank you so much. I know this was messy and probably tangent after tangent. I'm a little rusty. It's been over a year. But I appreciate this community so much because in the deepest, darkest times where I didn't even want to face myself, you all supported me so much. And the moments when I did show up vulnerably, like I am in a really low place and I'm really frustrated and all of these things, I just got messages of encouragement. And it's just been so heartwarming. And I am deeply, deeply grateful for all of you. And I love this community that we have built. And it just brings me the warmest, fuzziest vibes. And in the darkest spaces, your light was what helped me come through sometimes. So thank you so much. And stay tuned for all the things this season. I don't even know how to sign off, but just know I love you so, 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 so much. Please listen. And there's a lot we're going to unpack. Shifting mindsets, all the nuances, all the messiness. Let's go.